Hi folks, this is my second intent to do a video blog. The reason is very simple. It's about midnight. I'm in this motel in close to the western border of Russia. We have quite a horrible day behind us. I think I don't find the time or the rest to write an article. And also, basically, I would forget a lot of things that have happened today. It was quite a memorable day. Probably this day made it really to the top #1 of my worst border crossings ever. Not because there was so much chaos, but just because the time it took us to cross the border was really beyond everything that we had expected. I basically had expected something like 4 hours. Normal time would be 2 to 3 hours. So I'm in this nice hotel room, which is quite alright. I'm really happy that we found this here. So but let me explain a little bit what actually happened today. So in the morning we set off of Rēzekne in Latvia. Nice weather, perfect. We arrived at the border at 8:15 and thought, well, this looks good. There were a couple of cars in front of us, no problem. Well, we had first to cross into the border area. You get some papers that you can enter, and then there's another barrier where we had to wait a while, okay. But that was just exiting Latvia. And then there was a queue in no man's land. And this queue wouldn't move. So we were basically waiting at the barrier on Latvian ground for about 2 hours and nothing was moving there. Then we were allowed into no man's land. And there things got really bad because there was basically every half an hour, 3 or 4 cars would maybe move a little bit forward. We were basically in the sun, so we tried to find some protection from the sun in the shade of some big caravan campers. Of course, it was not so easy to get something to drink. Luckily, back in the Latvian border post, there was a vending machine, so I could get something to drink. Because we were there basically 5 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours. Until then, well, we were chatting with some other people there. For example, there was a German couple in an enormous new truck that were going down to Uzbekistan to deliver the truck to some customers who had bought it from them, because they made this special kind of trucks, off-road trucks. And then suddenly 2 bikers were passing us, were basically jumping the queue and getting somewhere in front. So I was quite pissed off, so I had a few words with them in German. And when I got back, I thought, wait a minute, maybe we can do something similar. So I had this idea and I asked basically everyone in front of us politely if we could just jump the queue, because our plan was to get to Moscow, which would mean that we would have to ride another 7 hours to Moscow. And it got already late, so something like 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the evening. So everyone said yes, and we jumped the queue by 4 cars basically. I also convinced the 2 bikers that they would let us in front once we would get there. But in the end we had quite a nice chat, and these 2 guys were quite nice, and 2 Germans who basically had, I would say, almost no planning what they were doing. So basically they wanted to do the same thing like us. So they wanted to go to Vladivostok, but the plan was to go through Mongolia and China. They had a China visa and to shortcut basically through China. Now the funny thing is, they had basically no plan how things worked there. So they didn't know that the ferry leaves only on Wednesday and only once a week. And then it occurred to me that there was a minor problem, well actually a major problem for them, and I had to tell them because they should know. And that is that, like in my case, and this was the reason why I switched from a German to a Belgian registration plate, you cannot enter Japan with a German bike or German vehicle, because that's what they had planned to do. They also wanted to take the ferry from Vladivostok to Japan, but this is out of question. They have German bikes, so no way. Sorry, I had to ruin the dream, but it's better to know it now than later. But so we had a good time there. There were also some two young boys from the Netherlands that went in a pickup truck. They planned to go down to Kazakhstan and also then further to Georgia, even Armenia. So we had a nice chat, and there was also other people. There were also other people passing by, and then we had a mixture of French, Dutch, German, English. There, that was quite funny. Making the best out of it, having a good laugh, because the things did not really move. So in the end, we were rather close. We could actually enter the Russian border zone, and we got, thanks to the guy who spoke Russian, to the German who spoke Russian, because he had worked there for many years. We got some customs papers already. In the end, it didn't help a lot, but okay. So things got very slow in the end. And then we took a decision, because it was clear it was already, I think, 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening. And going to Moscow in the dark, 7 hours, that just, we were already really knackered because we were under the sun for, I think you can see it in my face. So you really toasted during the whole day. And basically we said, we can do it, but we shouldn't. So I canceled the hotel and looked for this motel here that is basically 1.5 hours away from the border. So instead of making 610 kilometers, we made only 150. But on the other hand, it also means we are only 450 kilometers behind schedule, which is more or less equivalent to a half day. Now we can probably not make up for it, but half a day is still all right. We have a buffer of 2 days until we get to Vladivostok, so that should be fine. So in the end, we got into the control zone, so passport control. That went all right. That was rather quick, but then customs was just a nightmare. It was really like we felt we were in a film. It was so hilarious, totally inefficient, and there was basically one guy that was responsible for all the cars alone. And then it turned out that they had opened a special lane only for Russians, and the Russians got special treatment. They were basically almost waved through, where all the others had to do all the queuing. That also slowed us down considerably, because the same guy was always jumping between our paperwork and the Russian lane. So we had, of course, to fill in the paperwork again, because there was something, as usual, was written wrong, and then another paper he could have given us before. You could think it was on purpose, but I don't think so. But still, it was amazingly slow and mind-boggling. Really, that was really had to stay very calm, not just to freak out and I don't know to do what. So in the end, I was ready, but John wasn't. And it took another, I would say, 20 to 25 minutes until the customs guy finally got everything right, had finally typed everything into his computer. And then it was, I think, 8:45, 12 and a half hours before we arrived at the Latvian border. 12 and a half hours. Okay, then John still had to get some insurance, a so-called green card for Russia, because that's not possible to get it in Britain. He managed, and then we only had 1.5 hours to get to here, so it was just around sunset, but there was still enough light now, enough daylight, so that we didn't have to ride at night. And we got here, and that's quite alright. It's a nice motel. Restaurant was still open, self-service restaurant, and had something good to eat, a beer. And now I think I will, if I manage to get somehow internet here, I will upload this video, and also have my first thoughts about the next days, because I also have to cancel all my hotel bookings that I have done for the next days, because this will not be possible anymore. And we have to make a plan B and discuss it tomorrow morning and see from there. But well, things still look good. Okay, see you later.